Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Improveology, a podcast all about developing our better selves. This week we are going to be speaking with Diane Borders. She is a microbiologist, an author, and a holistic health practitioner who specializes in educating people about how their genetics affect their health, and once they know more about their genetics, how they can better their health by understanding their DNA. I'm really excited to talk to her.
I'm so excited, and I have some personal experience that I'll share as well in the podcast. But first, I want to direct you to Diane Borders' book, which is called Keep My Son, A Mother's Unprecedented Battle and Victory Over Her Son's Mental Illness. So in this book, it's going to talk to you about how Diane's work in DNA and methylation helped her son who was struggling with schizophrenia. I also want to explain the word methylation a little bit because it's going to be mentioned a few times in the podcast. And I'm breaking it down to the most simplest of terms as far as I understand it, which is very small, very little bit. So methylation is the process where the molecules attach to the DNA, and that's what turns on or turns off the different things in our DNA that affect our health. It also affects how nutrients are absorbed, and that can affect things not only physically, but in your mental health as well.
Yeah, without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode. Okay, well, hi Diane, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we've been excited to talk to you for a while now, ever since you kind of worked with Kaylani a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was fun.
Last fall, I got to learn a lot about my DNA from Diane.
Yeah, and some of the supplements that you ended up going over with her have really made a difference in her well-being.
Oh, good. You know, a lot of times I don't hear back on how people are doing. So it's really nice to hear that you're noticing a difference. As you get the nutrients layered in.
Down. Yeah, it's definitely something that I notice, especially when I forget for a few days.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, we were talking about how I'm going to have to come do a session with you before too long here.
You should.
Explain more to everyone, like who Diane is and what she does.
Well, so we did go over a brief introduction to Diane already, but we'll recap some of those things. So she is a microbiologist. She is the author of a book that is really incredible. It's a story of her son and his schizophrenia and the journey that she went on to kind of bring him back from some of that. And then now she spends her time educating people about their genetics and their health, and learning how we can kind of read our DNA a little bit to better our overall sense of well-being.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I want to know a little bit just about you as a person, and so can you talk just a little bit? I know you've got kids, because I know some of your kids.
Yes.
And then you've got grandkids and all that good stuff. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, so my husband and I have been dating since I was 14 and he was 16. So we are teenage sweethearts.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then we got married when we were pretty young. I was 20 and he was 22, right out of college. And we proceeded to have 3 babies within 5 years. So we were like, baby, baby, baby. It was quite fun. So we had them when we were young and full of a lot of energy so we could keep up with them. So it was actually a pretty good deal to do that young, but 2 boys and a girl.
Yeah, and considering how high energy and intelligent and active your kids are, that was a good call, I think.
It was, yes. I can't imagine trying to do that at 30. I was glad I was 22. I had him at 22, 24, and 27. So I was pretty young with a lot of energy on my own. So luckily, 2 boys and a girl. The boys were first, and then Ashley was last. So yeah, I'm glad I was really young. They take a lot of energy, children. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what kind of things are you into when you're not spending your time researching DNA and genetics? I'm going to try to say this right here. Methylation.
Methylation, yes.
Methylation. Okay.
Methylation.
Yeah.
I love to read. So if I'm not working with my clients, I'm reading for pleasure. So that's kind of what I'm more, intellectual. INTJ is my Myers-Briggs. So introvert, always learning, always finding something else that I don't know that I want to know about. So I spend a lot of time reading and absorbing, not usually for fun, not usually fun novels.
So what's the best book you've read in the last 6 months?
You know, my husband would laugh at that because he asks me that all the time, and I'm like, I don't know the name of the book, and I don't even know the name of the author. I'm like a writer's worst nightmare. I just kind of grab a book that's the topic I want and just start reading it. So yeah, that's a hard one.
What was it about, I guess?
I liked, right now I'm kind of, I've always liked viruses. So with this pandemic, you know, I was watching it heading our way in early January. So I've been reading a lot of books on viruses lately. I read a lot on viruses when I was in high school, and I wanted to go work, you know, as a virus hunter with the CDC. That was like my dream when I was 18, 19.
Interesting.
So I've always loved viruses. So I have a ton of virus books my children have given me over the decades. So pulling all of those back out and just reading more.
Yeah, trying to understand more. And so this has always been an interest for you, just really understanding the molecular pieces of our life and like the biology of what makes us us and how we're influenced by that.
Right. Thank goodness, like my brain kind of likes that, because when our oldest son started to get sick, you know, you start with putting your trust in the doctors for them to recover your well-being. And, you know, we went through 2 decades of escalating mental illness. So I was really fortunate that I have a scientific type mind that likes data. So I was very fortunate, and I loved science. So I was a good matchup to have our oldest son have me for his mom, instead of giving up and kicking him out of the house, like happens a lot. We just kind of hung in there for 2 decades through thick and thin to try to recover him. But so the kids would always say I'm not like all the other moms, because I never really cry much and I'm pretty stoic. So they used to tell me I was more like a man than a lady. And we would always laugh about it. And it came in good later on when he was really sick. We just stayed calm and pushed through it.
About how old was he when you started to notice some of those symptoms? They often start coming up in those like teenage or young adult years.
That's a great question. It was like you flipped a light switch and we lost him, and he was 14. And so it was like one day he was our son, and the next day we didn't, you know.
Wow.
Started self-mutilating and writing horrible notes, and it was really something that we weren't prepared for, because he was a perfect boy. I remember when he was young, I thought we'll never have problems with him. He was so smart and sensitive and really kind, and he was all the cousins' best cousin. And I remember thinking, I'll have problems with Tyler because he's so rowdy, and Quinn, you know, I'll have no problems with. And so we weren't prepared when we lost Quinn to mental illness. It really tripped the whole family up.
It'd be very bewildering.
I'm really excited to get into that story. Before we jump over there, so you got your start in microbiology, is what I saw, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into that.
Well, you know, I started school to be a nurse.
Okay.
And, you know, when I couldn't go be with the CDC and track viruses, because we lived here in Richland with 3 babies and no med school, I decided, well, I'll just go be a nurse. So I'll still be in the health field. So I took my first chemistry classes and fell in love with chemistry and never looked back towards nursing. And so I was going to go for a chemistry bachelor's and then go into the sciences, because I like the molecular level. And in the middle of going for my bachelor's in chemistry, they moved the program out of town. Then I just switched to chemical engineering. And then they moved that out of town. And so then they had, it was an AA and some kind of a radiation chemistry. So I switched to that. And that was about the time our youngest hit 2nd grade. And she's like, you know, don't go to school anymore. Stay home. You're always gone. And so I started to feel really guilty, because I went to school for like 9 years, going for the sciences. So I have all kinds of classes under my belt, but the degrees kept being moved out of the Tri-Cities. And with 3 babies, you know, that kind of leaves you stuck. So I ended up getting a job as a microbiologist with Simplot through my chemistry instructor. They had called her and said, send us your best student. So she sent me over there, and I just worked microbiology for quite a few years. Then I went off to Hanford and switched my career entirely and worked budgets, finance, contracts, project control. Yeah, so I totally switched my career in the middle of that because you couldn't make enough in the sciences without a PhD.
Yeah,
So,
it really sounds like your plans got derailed quite a few times.
Over and over and over.
Yeah, and probably felt really discouraging in those moments, but it's nice that in hindsight now, that all kind of led you to where you're doing this work you're really passionate about. Yeah,
exactly. You know, I switched my career for money to pay for raising 3 children with Dave, and so I wanted to participate. So Hanford pays a lot better. So yeah, I switched my careers out of the sciences and into business. And then our son became ill in the middle of that. So luckily I was able to work and help and keep our family together. I can't imagine the stressors of not having enough income in the middle of all that, you know, to make you not be able to do all that you can do. Because it's a really hard life to have somebody mentally ill in your family. It's a really hard life. And there's so many families like that here all around that you don't even know the struggle going on behind the doors.
Yeah, so, I hear a lot of empathy from you when you're thinking about families who didn't have the same resources that you really did. Yeah,
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
And then that's kind of interesting too, because it seems like your study of microbiology was almost a foot in the door to lead you down the next path you went on, which was this path of DNA.
Right. You're right. You know, when we went through the 17 years of the medical community dealing with the mental illness that was escalating, he had 7 hospitalizations, and the last one was almost 10 months long, and they let him out as sick as he went in. And we knew when they let him out that last time, it was going to be either he would die or I would die at the culmination of that last letting him out of Medical Lake. So we went in and changed locks on certain rooms in our house so that if I had to lock myself in there, you know, I would be safe enough to call police. And because there's a really broken mental health system all over, it's broken everywhere. And you're really kind of left on your own to make it through some of the situations. So it was while he was in Medical Lake that I started to really dig into genetics. And I thought, you know, if he was so amazingly brilliant and kind, and where did he go? And he had to still be in there somewhere. And I began to believe if I could affect his health at the cellular level, that I could pull him back and maybe find him again in the middle of all that. So I started digging into cell function, and that led me to genetics. And finally, Dr. Amy Yasko, and her data is what I found that really helped us recover him. So to me, I owe Dr. Amy Yasko our whole family's life. And her research is what I found on the internet in 2005. So, and she was the only one on the internet that had data that I even tripped across in all my research. And I flew out to Maine to learn her process and her system, and came back home, and with the help of our son's doctor, we started implementing the methylation genetic support using targeted nutrients. And, you know, we got him back. We would layer in a new nutrient every 4 to 6 weeks. And over 2 years' time, it took us that long to get 16 nutrients on board. And every nutrient we layered on top of the one before, we just started getting him back in little pieces. You know, he would lose the hallucinations, then he lost the delusions, and it was at the 2-year mark where the voices quit.
Wow.
And it has been 6 years, hallucination, delusion, and voice free. But 8 years where we lost hallucinations and delusions. So it's, we got our son back, and the family got to kind of find peace again. And, it doesn't mean all the traumas are gone. So, a lot of counseling is going on behind the scenes to process what we walked through and what we heard and saw. So there's a lot of healing that has to go on in a lot of these families. Even when you do finally get them back, there's a lot of family work for recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, recovering from that trauma, it's very traumatic, especially as you share that, like, there's a period of time where you were fearful of your son, and also cared and loved for him so deeply in those moments.
Right. And the way I made it through the later years was I actually thought of him as dead, and that this wasn't really my son that I was seeing, that this was somebody else, because it wasn't the same persona, it wasn't the same manner of speech. And so that helped me kind of keep my walls up enough to keep focusing and moving forward through the hard times. Yeah.
Was there any history of schizophrenia in the family?
Great question. Yes, there was. On my side of the family, both my mom and my dad, there's mental illness on both sides, but nobody ever talked about it. So I had no idea. And so when it happened to us, I was really shocked. I didn't know what was happening, because the conversation was never had in the family, to even know what to do. And that's when I started lifting up rocks and finding out that, we had mental illness, schizophrenia on both sides. I had a great aunt that died in the Pendleton Mental Institution from schizophrenia, from trying to drown her daughter in the bathtub twice. And I was like, would I have had children had I known? I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have made the decision, had I known it was on both sides, I might not have had babies. But I didn't have that knowledge. So I like to, when I teach my seminars, I like to tell people, don't be afraid to talk about mental illness, because it's going on in so many homes. And if we can start to talk about it, then it doesn't have to be a stigma. And then maybe we can recover some of these family members that we've lost in the mental illness struggle.
Yeah, to normalize that, because I think when there's an unpeeling of those layers, looking back at your family history, it's like you start to see, oh wow, I was told this when I was a kid, or I thought this is what was happening, and then you see this with such clarity when you can't understand it, but it's like normalizing that it's okay to talk about, because there's so much shame behind that.
Right. And, we went through a lot of the church talking about it being demons, and kind of felt ostracized, and because they couldn't cast the demons out, and a lot of judgment came from that. So I walked kind of it was hard to, because I am a Christian, and I still go to church every Sunday, and it was really hard to walk through that with so much judgment, that you felt like it was a parenting failure or something you didn't instill in your children, when really it was a nutrient chemical imbalance that we needed to correct in his genetics, so he could process and clear all his brain neurotransmitters that were stuck and piling up and turning on all those voices and hallucinations and delusions. Once we got his dopamine draining, all the symptoms started to slide away. But at the time it was hard to walk through that judgment. And so I see why a lot of people stay quiet and don't talk about it, because it's really hard to walk in that.
Yeah.
So obviously there's going to be a lot of questions that Kaylani and I probably have that we can cover that are related to the more technical aspects, but let's walk back for a second. So you said that this kind of happened when he was 14 years old. All of a sudden it was this switch that flipped, and it was like this different person was there with you. I think for most of us human beings, we don't handle the unknown very well, and we don't handle changes to things that are familiar very well. So what was the process like that took you from probably the shock and the emotional overload into the steps that led you down to kind of digging into the science of all of this, and kind of following that instinct you have inside of you to go hunt viruses, but in this case, hunt down what might be happening in the genetic structure? What was that emotional process?
I knew, kind of back to that one statement I made, I knew he was going to die or I was going to die, because he had a fixation on killing blondes, and I was the only blonde, around, and his voices, they focused on me, because everybody else had kind of pulled back and pulled away. And I kind of stood there in that gap, and we had learned that, a lot of times those voices push the sick people away from their loved ones just by the things they say. And a lot of times they're homeless on the streets because you're so fearful. So I knew either he would die on the streets, being taken advantage of, or, whatever, or I would die at his hands, because I would wake up at night and he would be standing over my bed in the dark, and I would have to come awake and act really normal, like everybody finds their children, at 20 years old standing over them. And I just knew it was going to be death. Somebody was going to die in the mix. And I knew that medicine and the pharmaceuticals, they weren't working. We had tried them for 17 years. We had tried every drug that was on the market. So we were really at who's going to die, or am I going to just really get into the research and just block everything out of my consciousness and just dig. And so that's really what I did. And I was fortunate that I, again, knew the science and wasn't afraid of the microbiology, and I kind of felt like I was the perfect person to be as a mom. And so that was the catalyst, the life or death situation.
Yeah. So kind of reaching that point of I can't be in denial that this isn't a serious thing. These are the options that would definitely motivate you. And then you had this wonderful foundation to even have the curiosity.
Right. And, I realized there was not an answer in medicine, and the pharmaceuticals, they weren't going to work. And it was a wall. We just hit a wall. And at the time, my daughter was in Milwaukee, and she was working in restraining order court. And she would tell me all the time, Mom, I see people just like our family, and they get restraining orders and people die. And I don't want you around, Quinn, and you've got to stay away. And if she ever found out if I skipped and missed a beat and said something wrong, she would actually hang up on me if she thought I had been in his space. And so, because she just knew that I would be killed, and then how would the family keep going on if I'm dead? And then how would Quinn live with that later if we ever got him back? And, it was really traumatizing.
Yeah, that's intense.
Time. And so that's what made me just go, okay, I've just got to find the answer myself. I've got to find the answer myself. And I remember praying that, God, show me what I need to see, and help me find the research. And when I see it, help me understand what I'm reading. So every day I started out like that. You got to just show me the data, help me see it, help me understand it, and then help me implement it. So that's what I did.
Well, and you're now a holistic wellness practitioner, correct?
Right. I went when my son was really ill. I knew I had to kind of find the answers myself. I went back to college in my 50s. And I'm 61 now, and I went back and got my holistic health practitioner degree, and then I got certifications in iridology and homeopathy and just wellness consulting. Just to get used to the language and the nutrients, and that new way. Instead of pharmaceuticals, I needed to go learn about nutrients and nutrition, and so I went to college in my 50s while I worked full time and tried to recover Quinn. It was a crazy time.
Yeah, I've had a lot of interesting conversations about the medical system, and about how in our current system, people do not ask enough questions of their doctors and assert their own knowledge enough. I've been talking specifically with some people who have entire businesses based around the kind of, I can't think of the exact terminology for it, but basically
advocacy and empowering the client or the patient to ask questions and to question those processes, because there is a lot of blind trust. And I think like what you were sharing with your experience and what I know of the mental health field, so many people have zero idea of what to expect, and so they're afraid, and they do just kind of trust this process that's laid out for them. And there's not a lot of communication. There's starting to be more, but about the types of things that you do, where there are these holistic methods and you have these other options.
Right. I've worked with so many mentally ill family members over the last 6 years and seen such incredible turnarounds and people getting their lives back. It's very rewarding. Yeah. It's really rewarding because then they don't have to go to the extremes that we went to for 2 decades. You know, we can cut it off at the knees and try to pull them back earlier and save families, the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little more about what did you discover in terms of what causes schizophrenia?
What I would say is you have some genetic mutations in this methylation pathway. This methylation pathway is a biochemical process that's going on in almost every cell of your body. And in a region of that pathway is a region where dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and serotonin can have issues clearing. And so in our family, unbeknownst to us, we were double mutated on every one of those genes. Both Dave and I are double mutated on all of that. So our children are all double mutated. And I remember when they were little, I would tell them, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs. You know, look at my family history, and you don't know if you're going to get to walk away from it. So just don't do it. And our oldest son didn't listen. So drinking, drugs, smoking, unbeknownst to him, he didn't know he had really bad genetics and was double mutated on all the brain neurotransmitters. And when he assaulted his body with all of that toxin and alcohol and drugs, it just crashed his system. And so, you know, looking back, hindsight, I could have said, don't do it. Here's why. Look at your methylation pathway. Look at all your mutations. You already don't clear these brain neurotransmitters. Don't become a toxic. Do other things on top of it. So luckily, our other 2 children watched what Quinn went through, and they, you know, were smarter because they have the same genetic propensity as Dave and I and our oldest. You know, we're all 3 kind of a weakness in that area. So once you kind of know where you're mutated, where your genes need extra cofactor nutrients, you can come in and start targeting those genetic regions and help those genes make their enzymes. And when they're making their enzymes better, then they start functioning like they should, and they start clearing out the dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine that is stuck and can't get through because of the double mutations. And there's also single mutations, which aren't as impactful as a double, but you can still get groups of yellow mutations that can be pretty impactful too. So in this methylation pathway, depending on where you're mutated, you may have heart attack, stroke, blood clot risk. If you've got the brain neurotransmitter region mutated, you may struggle with anxiety and depression, bipolar, all the way up to schizophrenia and paranoid schizophrenia, Asperger's, autism. Mm-hmm. So depending on where you have mutations on this pathway, you might present looking a little bit different, but it's still the same theory. You know, let's find where you have mutations, then let's come in and let's target nutrients where we can help these genes and their enzyme production. So it's really pretty basic when you get down to the bottom line. You know, where are you mutated? Let's work on them in a certain order. Let's get the downstream genes clearing first. So that everything is clearing, and then we can pop up and work on the primary wheels and get those with some support so that we kind of get your methylation pathway just in general working in a more like a well-oiled machine, you know, instead of piling up chemicals, we've got everything draining.
And from my experience, it was really reaffirming to feel like I understood what was really going on, because I have a propensity to feel anxious, especially when there's stress, and I could see kind of like similar to what you were sharing with your family history, like I could see as an adult looking back family members who have struggled too, but never talked about it, or it would show up as addiction, or it would show up as like anger instead of actually managing what was going on. And so it felt like this really wonderful aha of, oh, this makes sense now. This is all connecting, and you're not feeling like you're kind of navigating in the dark.
Right. A lot of times you'll feel like, why can't I get control of my emotions? What's wrong with me? When really you probably have norepinephrine, epinephrine clearance issues. And so when that piles up comes your fight or flight, your anxiety, your depression, and not, instead of feeling like you're a failure, that you can't control your emotions, it's kind of reaffirming to realize, oh, I'm just mutated in those regions. I'm just not clearing it very well. Let's target some nutrients and let's start draining that out. Let's get the genes making their enzymes better and clearing chemicals instead of a log jam. Yeah, and so it is empowering to realize you have some control. And it's just a nutrient instead of a man-made chemical. We're just targeting in nutrients to help your gene function, and your symptoms start to slide away slowly over time as you get stuff layered in. Yeah.
Well, I love it because, I've been to several holistic doctors as well as several medical doctors in the traditional MD sense of the word.
Right.
And I've always found there to be kind of a balance in between the two.
Yes.
I've definitely been to the holistic doctors that were like, here, take these 100 Chinese pills that we found, that have pieces of panda droppings in them a day, and hold this crystal near your heart and you'll be fine, But then there's the other side of it where there actually is a lot of truth. And what I was picking up on a lot while you were talking there is when we do take pharmaceuticals, the kind of underlying principle, it seems, is they're targeting certain cells and things like that in your body. And that is exactly what you're doing with these nutrients. So it's not necessarily like as unproven. There's a lot of scientific evidence to back up the stuff that you're talking about here on the holistic front.
In fact, when we layered in the nutrients for our son, he stayed on his pharmaceutical meds. My goal wasn't to get him off those prescriptions. I just decided I was going to ignore them because they weren't working, and they let him out of medical aid just as sick as he went in. So I thought, well, I didn't get him in any different shape back with me. So I'm just going to ignore those and let them do their thing. And I went to them and showed them his mutations, showed them the list of nutrients I was going to add in. And I just asked him, do you have a problem with any of these nutrients? I'm going to add them in one at a time. Will you watch him with me while I watch him? And we'll just see how this goes as we try getting his biochemistry on the methylation region working better. Let's just see what we can do for getting him back. So I worked right along with his doctors, and I have MS. And so I have had that diagnosis since I was 30. So I've gone the doctor route. Yes, when I was 30, I got diagnosed. I have lesions all over in my brain. And my first 5 years with the medical community, I did their pharmaceuticals, and I was walking with a cane, and then they wanted me to get in a wheelchair. And that was at the 5-year mark. And I actually decided I was going to walk away from that because I knew if I got in the wheelchair, I wouldn't get back out. And so I found a MD that was more of a functional MD, and I went to him and we did IVs of nutrients for 6 months. We checked my hormones, my metabolism, my thyroid. We got everything dialed in, and I actually started pulling back from my inability to walk. And to this day, if I stay on all my nutrients, I'm pretty mobile. I still have issues if I try to walk too long. My muscles will still kind of go spastic and lock up, which is painful. But I think for 31 years of MS with lesions all over, I do pretty well. I started back to a neurologist a couple years ago at my doctor's request, and they did an MRI. It had been 25 years since I'd had one. And I found lesions all over my brain. And I figured it came from the trauma of Quinn and those 2 decades, because you're not supposed to be in stress with MS. So, but she considers me to have benign MS because I'm pretty mobile without the use of a pharmaceutical. So, but
that's amazing.
That's pretty amazing. But I told her, you know, I wouldn't consider it benign MS because I know if I got off my nutrients, that I would be right back where I was before I got on them all those years ago. I might not be using a pharmaceutical, but to me, I'm using cofactor nutrients in place of the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
And I can't walk away from those. If I did, I'd have to turn to pharmaceutical.
Yeah. Without sharing any identifiable information, can you tell us some examples of people that you've helped and like their health, other health examples of improvement when they followed the regimen that you gave them?
Yes, I've had quite a few people with schizophrenia do some amazing turnarounds. I had a catatonic schizophrenic that I started working with him in September, and by December, he got on a train and went with his family out into the forest for Christmas. And by the following May, he had moved out. He was in a psych home, a catatonic schizophrenic, and from September to May, he moved out in May, back into his family's home and started a lawn care business, and his schizophrenia symptoms were quieted.
All the way from catatonic.
Catatonic schizophrenic in a psych home here in town. The sister actually read my book in Indiana and called me, and it was crazy to find out that her brother was in a psych home in the Tri-Cities, because, you know, I put my book in Oregon, so she had no idea I lived in the town where her brother lived.
What a coincidence, yeah.
It was pretty amazing. So he's returned out of the psych home and into the community. Then I had another gal I helped 8 months ago, and they came back March before all the lockdown hit, and they came back in to Fuse. And when they first came in, you know, she did a lot of movement disorder, aggressive kind of breaking in and disrupting. And when they came in March, it was like a different person. She just sat there and carried on a conversation with us, and she was doing phenomenally better. And the mom and dad were just amazed. And that was, you know, maybe 6 months of layering in nutrients, and they were already starting to get her back. So yeah, I've seen it over and over, especially the mental illness part. When you can start getting norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine draining, it just changes their personalities. And pretty quickly.
Yeah. Kind of describe more about Quinn now and how he's doing now.
So he's great. You know, he's been hallucination, delusion, and voice-free since 2014 across the board. You know, he's doing wonderful. He lives with us. You know, I think there's some knowledge he lost. You know, he got his AA when he was 18, and he was brilliant in mathematics. He was doing college math in 8th grade. And he wanted to go to MIT, and he had all of these dreams in the math world. And I think he's lost some of that knowledge of, you know, all the math because he went all through all the college math with straight A's. I think he's lost a lot of that knowledge and all the trauma. So I think there's been some deficits from 17 years of psychosis.
Yeah, there's some things that can't be recovered, but
right.
But it sounds like his overall functioning ability to have meaningful friendships, relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, it's been great during this pandemic. You know, he runs all the errands for us and keeps the whole family in line and all set good. So it's like, thank goodness, because we're old. And so we let the young kid go run around. Yeah. So no, he's doing really well.
That's awesome. It's such a crazy story that you have. I mean, on all fronts, really. On the front of keeping your MS in a benign state for that long, and then also the story of your family, and then you know, and I know Tyler fairly well, I would say, and he is a really smart, charismatic guy as well. That really made something cool out of his life.
And he is the middle child?
Yes, he's the middle. And he's the one I thought, I'm going to have all kinds of trouble with him because he's an extrovert and so funny and always in groups of people. And I thought, he's the one that I'm going to have a run for my money. But I think when Quinn became ill, everybody else just kind of just calmed down and just decided to just really try hard to not cause problems. So in some ways, you know, Quinn's life was a blessing because, you know, our daughter went on and became a nurse. Tyler, you know, has a real heart for those with mental illness because of what we've walked through. So I think they came out pretty incredible adults because they have a lot of compassion for the downtrodden that are really kind of marginalized because they aren't quite as successful. And a lot of people don't understand everybody's struggles. So I think we have some pretty amazing kids that have learned a lot. And sometimes when you go through hardship, you come out a pretty amazing person on the other side.
The suffering that your family went through really extended empathy to those populations who've been through similar hardship.
Right. That's a great way to say it. Yeah.
So all this has led you now to what you do now, which is the New Mutant LLC. And that's the full name of the business, right?
Yep. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, so I want to hear a little bit about that because we have some limited, experience with it, having Kaylani, going in and doing.
And I tried my best to explain it to him, but it was a lot to digest. And so hearing from you will probably give more clarity.
Right.
So just kind of walk me through, because we did talk about the fact that I am very interested in doing something with you in the next couple of months, maybe. But for people who may end up listening to this, walk me through so if I contacted you and said, I listened to this and I was really interested in learning more about my DNA and seeing if there's maybe areas where, I could experience a better sense of wellness by targeting nutrients that maybe I'm deficient in. What would you tell me the process is going to look like?
It sounds like you understand it really well, because that was really concise. I'm like, that's good. You want to get hired?
Well, I have been listening to you for the last 30 minutes. I've been trying to pay attention. I'm absorbing the knowledge here.
That's funny. Yeah, so I tell people the first step is to get an ancestry DNA test. And it's regularly $99. If money's a problem, it goes on sale every other month for less than $99. And probably right before Father's Day, it'll hit a sale again. So you grab that spit test kit and you spit in the test tube and mail it off. When your data gets back, there's a process where you go and request your raw data. That is actually 700,000 rows of code of your genetics. And so it's that raw data file I help you download. And then you send me that raw data file. And then Quinn and I go in and we pull out 110 different gene SNPs that are tied to the methylation pathway.
Wow.
And then we know what, you have two letters that sit on the rung of your DNA. You think of your DNA like a ladder, and you have all these rungs on the ladder. What we do is we go to the different rungs on the ladder that are tied to methylation. And we know what two letters should be sitting there. So then we go look at your code and we look to see, did you get the two correct letters, or did mom or dad give you a swap out for a letter that shouldn't be there? And we call those alleles. And so we can then go in at those 110 locations and see, what did you get from mom and dad, and do you have a single mutation or a double mutation? On the single mutation, that affects the enzyme production at about 60 to 70% of normal. If you're double mutated, you're only making enzymes at around 20 to 30%. So, the double mutations are more impactful. The key, though, is to realize that everybody has mutations. I've not met anybody alive that we all have them. And just because you have them doesn't mean you're going to get sick. You can have mutations and still be pretty functional if you're eating well, you're sleeping, you know how to handle stress. There's a lot of things we can do. I call it the environmental leg, where we can keep ourselves really well. And we don't necessarily have to let our genetics ruin our future if we make some really smart choices just in our lifestyle. And then you pair that with then targeted nutrients to where we find your mutations. We can come in and just do some added nutrient improvement on top of your diet. Yeah.
So what are some of the most common deficiencies that you see in your clients?
Well, I would say most everybody has brain neurotransmitter issues. Maybe 1 out of 20, their brain neurotransmitter region's pretty good. So it kind of lets you know a lot of people are walking around with probably low-level anxiety or depression that they just kind of live with. So the brain neurotransmitter region and then the heart region. I'm really hit on the heart region, and we always knew that all the men died in the early 60s and nobody ever lived past that. And so when I looked at my methylation genetics, I'm like, wow, there is all the heart attack, stroke, blood clot risk. And one of my children have the same issue. So we have to work really hard with targeted B vitamins, some of the methylated Bs, along with SAMe. And then the multi-minerals are really critical. The minerals are really important cofactors on many different regions on the pathway. So I have what I call my favorite 5 nutrients, and that's really low dose lithium orotate, like a little 5 milligram, along with a B12. And then I do a multi-mineral, a B complex, and a multivitamin. And I always tell everybody, just get on those, whether you want to know anything about your genetics or not, just get on those 5. Layer them in one at a time, and then in about 5 months, see how you're feeling. And if you're actually starting to feel a lot better, those 5 do a lot of work on the methylation pathway. So then it maybe leaves 4 or 5 other genes we have to come in and maybe target something else. So,
you mentioned something that I knew about, but I don't know if it had come up in our conversation today about Quinn being someone who helps you now in this process with New Mutant. Is that also an empowering role for him to be on this other end and knowing that he's helping other people who maybe struggle with similar things that he's struggled with?
Yeah, it does make him feel really good. He's come so far. I just can't even explain the difference that he can, you talk to him, it's like talking to a normal person, processing, before you couldn't even get him to engage and respond. And now you wouldn't know his history if I didn't tell you. Yeah. He's always going to be an introvert, kind of like me. But yeah, no, it makes him feel really good. And he doesn't miss a nutrient ever. He never skips a day. He never gets lazy because he's afraid he'll go back to where he was. Yeah. So he's just, really rigid on not missing. Where me, I'll kind of get lazy and maybe skip a couple days, and then my MS symptoms will start to flare. And I just get right back on my stuff. And I don't panic because I know I just missed some doses and nothing's really wrong with me. Just got to get on what my body needs so that it functions well. Yeah. So we all are mutated. So, but the mutations don't have to mean, a death sentence or schizophrenia or some neurological issue. It just kind of lets you know we're all just have the same struggles.
Yeah, I love just breaking down like these different elements of what it means to be human, and how much historically we've kind of denied these aspects of ourselves. So it really feels like an unveiling of just like, hey, we're human. That means we're going to have these issues. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we can do about it, because you're not immune to the condition of what can happen on that cellular level.
Right. And it's kind of empowering to know we all have mutations, so there's nothing wrong with this. The mutations don't make us ill. They just make us unique, and they give us our special qualities.
That's literally what I was just going to comment on. I was going to say it's got to be empowering for people to realize that there is some degree of this that is in their control with something as simple as, just getting the right nutrients in their system.
Right. Well, that environmental leg, Dr. Yasko's kind of famous for her 3-legged stool. One leg is your genetics. One leg is dealing with pathogens that maybe are making you ill, like maybe Lyme disease or candida, any kind of viral, bacterial, parasite, fungus. Work with your doctor on those, make sure they aren't part of the issue. And then the last one, again, is that environmental leg, the one that we have control over. Are we drinking enough water? Are we moving and staying active? Are we sleeping? Is our diet nutrient dense? Are we controlling our stress? There's so many things that if we just did those alone, we can keep our genetics pretty silent for being an impact in a negative way. But it's when we start not doing those things so well that then the genetics can kind of rear up, because you get a lot of your nutrients from your diet. So if you start going a pretty nutrient deficient diet, then what your genetics have to work with if you're not doing supplements too then you're kind of doing a double whammy. So, yeah.
I feel like most people I know, including myself, for a large portion of my life, I've had probably pretty nutrient deficient diets.
Yeah,
just because of the way that we tend to eat in this modern
conversation is inspiring me to eat a salad today.
That diet is called the SAD diet, the Standard American Diet, SAD.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's pretty nutrient deficient.
Yeah, well, and just because of my role as a mental health therapist, when we talk about stress and managing that aspect, there's also this really toxic mindset about like it being praised how much stress you can carry and how much you can endure, versus really seeing that as a huge risk factor that can turn on these genetic mutations versus leaving them dormant.
Right. And, you know, if people can find a way to de-stress, what is it that you do that brings your stress level down? You know, for me, I read a book. Other people go do yoga, or, you know, my husband loves to go take a walk around the lake. You know, you got to find the thing that it is, you know, that you need that ratchets down your stress level and your cortisol, you know, pumping out. And yeah, so there's a lot of things in the environmental leg that it's pretty empowering that maybe the genetics never even shows itself. Because maybe you don't have that many mutations, but you know, some of us have a lot. I know my family, we have a lot. And it's really funny, you know, some of those mutations like the COMT double mutations can make you pretty brilliant people. You know, that fine line they say between brilliance, you know, and madness. Those are kind of on the brain neurotransmitter region. And, you know, red double mutated people can be pretty brilliant and eccentric. And it can kind of be a double-edged sword. So not all mutations are bad. That's another thing I talk about often at my seminar is some mutations confer kind of immunities, like there's a gene for HIV. And if you're double mutated on that gene, then you won't get AIDS if you're exposed to the HIV virus. And so, yeah, so sometimes mutations happen for a protective reason for us. Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. A couple of quick questions before we wrap up today. I wanted to mention vitamins and supplements and ask a question on those. So I've always heard, and I've never really done the study for myself, but what would you say about like the quality of vitamins and supplements? I've heard that there definitely is a difference in, you know, when you go to the store to buy them, you should be aware, maybe do some research before that, because it's not like you just go grab vitamin B off the shelf and all vitamin Bs are equal per se.
Right. You know, there's been a couple, in the last 5 years, there's been a couple reports coming out where they would go into like, you know, Rite Aid or Walgreens and grab some of those off the shelf and take them back to the lab and run tests on them. And they would find that what's supposed to be in them is not in them, or not even at a level that's really, it makes that even a useful nutrient. So yeah, not all nutrients are the same. It's better to go for a pharmaceutical grade nutrient like the pure encapsulation or Thorn, you know, some of those higher end. You do pay more, but then you'll know that within that capsule is actually what's supposed to be there at the level and dosing that you're expecting to see. So that has actually been a problem that there's been reports on recently. Yeah.
And because I know this, having gone through the process, Diane will help direct you towards those resources to make sure that you're getting those quality supplements.
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah, right.
And then, of course, because of the time we're in, you know, in the beginning, I was definitely following your Facebook in the beginning of the kind of official outbreak of COVID-19 here in the States, and kind of watching that. And I'm sure that with your inquisitive nature and your background, you've probably done quite a bit of research into this yourself. So what is your like hot take on what's happening here in the month of May?
Well, you know, it's turning so political now that I've kind of stopped posting a lot because everybody's in their own camp, where I'm just kind of like, let me see what the researchers are finding. Right. And let me see what symptoms we should be watching for. I think we need to treat the virus with respect. I don't think we know enough about it yet. as of last week, we're just starting to see different symptoms showing up in children. So we're not going to really know enough about this virus for a year or two by the time all the autopsies and research is done. So to say it's like the flu, I don't buy into that, because we don't know what the SARS-CoV-2 is. And we don't know enough to say it's just the flu. It's just like an ordinary coronavirus. Well, SARS-CoV-2 is a little bit different than the ordinary coronavirus that gives you a head cold. So I'm a little more leery about throwing everything wide open, but I'm also of the mind that we've got to have our economy or we don't have anything. So I'm kind of the theory that let's let the old people stay home, 60 or older, 65 or older, let them stay home if they want to. Let those with immune compromised bodies stay home. Let those that are afraid stay home. And then the people who really feel like, if I get this virus, yeah, it might take me out for a week or two, but I'm young, I'll bounce back. I'd rather have my job and family and livelihood fed. So I'm kind of more of a let's open it up, smart, and let's let those who want to stay home in the risk categories, and let everybody else start living their lives. And we have so much stress and trauma and depression and everything coming from this lockdown so long. I think we've gone pretty far from let's flatten the curve so the hospitals can be prepared to now let's just lock down everybody. Now the hospitals are hurting because nobody's coming in. So I think we've gone too far one way, and we need to kind of pull it back and be a little correction. Yeah, I think we went overly too far, and we need to kind of pull it back and be a little wiser. Yeah. Because like I said, we don't really know this virus yet, and it'll be a while. And SARS-CoV-1, we don't even have a vaccine for, and that was 2002, 2003. And that's SARS-CoV-1. So why do we think we're going to have one really fast in SARS-CoV-2?
Interesting. Now, you had a little recommendation that you'd posted on Facebook for what nutrient or what supplements or vitamins people should be taking that, full disclaimer, is not going to prevent you from getting COVID-19 or anything like that, but it might help a little bit.
It might help strengthen your immune system, right? Yes, you've seen a lot of doctors come out with vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin C, and then they love zinc. But I always tell people, just get on a great multi-mineral, because you really need the selenium and all of the other things too for your thyroid. And so instead of just buying a bottle of zinc, just buy a great multi-mineral, and zinc's going to be in there. That way you get all the full suite of the minerals. So yeah, A, D, C, and multi-mineral I really like. There are some studies coming out talking about melatonin maybe being helpful, but I know a lot of people probably already take melatonin, so that's kind of popped up recently. Me, I'm just kind of watching the data and watching the symptoms and seeing how doctors are treating patients successfully outside of the hospital. And there's been quite a few doctors that are doing nebulizing hydrogen peroxide, or maybe put an iodine drop in it, and they're doing different kinds of therapies within the doctor's practice. But you would have to find more of a functional MD or naturopathic doctor that would do that. Now, I'm lucky, my doctor, I contacted him, he mailed me a saline bag with hydrogen peroxide, so I can do those nebulizing treatments at home. And so a lot of people are preparing just to try to do that at home. You don't even need SARS-CoV-2, it can help with any virus, any bacteria. It doesn't just have to be SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, and then if you become ill, then they call it COVID-19. But the virus behind that disease is SARS-CoV-2. And with SARS-CoV-1, they came up with a vaccine, and when they rolled it out to just mice, they killed them all. They had a huge cytokine storm, and they all died. So if SARS-CoV-2 came out, I'd probably wait a long time and let everybody else volunteer before I let them try a rushed out vaccine. I'm more of a skeptic on doing things fast, maybe not quite right.
And I read, there's been an overwhelming amount of information that has come out, and it's every day there's some new article and you don't know which ones have been thoroughly vetted by the scientific community and which one are kind of shooting from the hip. But I did see a headline and a little blip of an article about how they were starting to think that there was some particular genetic variations in people that are very adversely affected by the COVID-19 virus. Have you seen anything about that?
I know the ACE2 gene, they're looking at that, and men have more ACE2 gene receptors, and they kind of think that maybe is why men are getting it more critically. They have more receptors. But there's also some FURRIN, furin gene. There's quite a few other genes that are starting to be looked at that if you're, if you have any mutations on these, they could either be helpful or maybe they're not helpful. So it just kind of depends. So people are finally starting to look at the genetic portion of it. And there's probably 8 or 9 genes now that are being looked at, but nothing concrete that you could, really do any actionable steps from knowing.
Yeah, at this point.
Yeah, at this point. But yeah, like I said, it'll be a year or two and then we'll go, okay, now we know this much about it. But for right now, every other week there's new stuff coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm just of the group that I respect a virus. They can take us down pretty fast. And I'd rather we know a lot more about it before I get it. And maybe in the hospital, I want them to have a whole lot of data before I go in there. So I'm trying to stay well through the nutrient process, keeping my immune system strong so I can fight it at home and never really make it to the hospital. But I don't want to be there with them messing around with ventilators if ventilators are the wrong answer. It's like, I think I would try to stay well a little bit longer.
Yeah, we were, I think, having a conversation with another friend, but we often, as humans, like to have definite answers.
Yeah,
and the reality of this is that it's a bit of a waiting game and a collecting information and reforming our ideas as we go. So you see a lot of impatience in people not feeling like they're getting the answers that they want. But what I'm hearing you say really validates where my mindset has been, as far as like, this is the nature of what learning about a virus and a pandemic looks like. And it's just not an experience we've all been a part of until now. This is life-changing, and this is what it looks like, is that it's a slow unfolding of information.
Right. And then is there going to be a second wave or maybe a third wave? Nobody really knows. Will it keep mutating? Because RNA viruses like SARS-CoV-2, they mutate pretty readily. And a lot of times when they're mutating, they're attenuating and becoming less virulent. And, maybe it's something we end up always having around in the future, and we're all going to end up getting it eventually. And so, yeah, it's, the longer it can mutate and attenuate, maybe the less viral it becomes.
I did see, I think it was the CDC that released it, that it's already undergone like 123 different mutations. The SARS, yeah.
Right. And they're hoping that it attenuates and becomes less virulent. But you never know, the virus doesn't want to kill its host. It wants to, it needs you. So if it kills you off too fast, then the outbreak dies down. But if it can mutate to where it doesn't make you quite so sick, then it gets to stay in its host and live. So, it doesn't want to kill its host off.
It's an interesting perspective that I hadn't thought of that way. And
that you're kind of the host.
Yeah.
It's like, welcome. Yeah, and if you can have a pretty strong immune system, and you can beat it back and then start making antibodies against it, you'll be better able to fight second wave if you've had it and made your own antibodies to it versus trying to get a vaccination that works. Because RNA viruses can change really rapidly, and the vaccination might not be any good in 4 months when it's mutated again enough that vaccine's not relevant. But if you can get it, have a strong enough immune system to beat it back, well, then you've made your own innate immunity to it. And it'll be stronger and better lifelong versus a vaccine that's just shooting in the dark for a recipe. Yeah. But again, letting the scientists and the doctors and nurses learn what they need to know before you get it is wise. So I do have a lot of respect for it, but I know we can't let our economy crash. And we can't have suicides and domestic violence and stuff coming out of this prolonged forced lockdown. So there's so many other things to think of than just the virus.
I think that's a really balanced perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, is that part of, also one last comment here, because I thought that was interesting and I'd like to understand it a little better. So as the virus goes through its mutations and maybe kind of loses some of its bite, is that kind of the concept that's behind the herd immunity principle?
Well, the herd immunity principle, I believe it's 80% of us have to have had it and have innate immunity to it, that our body has created antibodies against it on our own. 80% of us have to kind of have that. That's the herd immunity, so that if it comes back again, 80% of us have the antibodies to it, and we're not going to get sick, and so it's not going to get passed around.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
20%, they could, pick it up and still get it, but but the 80% of the populations, that's a huge number.
That is a huge
For herd immunity to really be valid right now.
Yeah.
Probably not. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's why I always tell people, let everybody learn more, and don't you go to the hospital yet. Do the A and the D and the C and your multi-mineral, and see if your doc will let you do some inhalation breathing treatments if you ever got it. But Dr. Brownstein has done a lot of, I share them whenever he puts them up, a lot of his patients, when they're sick with COVID, they actually come to his parking lot and they go out and hang an IV. They go out and do ozone shots, and they send them home with hydrogen peroxide, saline inhalation treatments, and not a single one's had to go to the hospital. And some of them have been pretty sick. So again, our bodies are strong. If we give them enough nutrients, they should be able to perform, unless there's some really underlying disease that maybe you don't even know about because you never go to the doctor and you think you're really healthy, but maybe you have something underlying that you don't even recognize. But our bodies are pretty amazing when they have what they need to function, right? But the genetics is interesting.
So if someone wants to go and contact you at New Mutant, what is your preferred means for them to reach out to you? Usually
they just drop me an email at Diane@newmutant.com, and okay. Diane's with one N. Yeah, and they just drop me an email there. They can call me at 521-4388. But a lot of times there's so much data I need to send back and forth that the email is a lot quicker for data dumps and information along that line.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we include your contact information in the outro of this episode. Well, I want to thank you for spending time with us this afternoon, Diane, and for sharing this lifetime of knowledge that you have acquired, and under some pretty intense situations.
Trial by fire.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We learned so much, and I think that you have just such a really interesting and beautiful story that brought you to where you are now. So we're so glad that your family is healthy and that New Mutant is available for people to understand more about what's going on in their bodies.
Right. Well, thank you guys for thinking about me and inviting me in to chat. I always like to talk about this topic. So,
yeah. Well, we'll let you know when the episode airs. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. We hoped you enjoyed our visit with Diane as much as we did.
Loved it.
Yeah, I learned a lot in that brief span of time for sure.
Yeah, we could have kept talking.
Oh yeah, there's every once in a while you meet those people you just want to keep picking their brain for hours, Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone would listen to this for hours though.
No, we tried to keep it brief, but if you want to learn more, we have some resources for you.
Yeah, so if you want to reach out to Diane, you can go to her website at newmutant.com. That's just newmutant.com. Or you can email her at Diane, spelled DIANE, @newmutant.com, which is pretty easy to get a hold of, actually.
Yes, she's always been very responsive in my work with her. And I've been curious because I've gotten to spend more time with Diane when I learned more about the methylation in my own DNA. What did you think about some of the things that she was sharing? Was there anything that was new for you?
Pretty much everything. For starters, I did not really have a good understanding of what methylation was, or how DNA could have those mutations that could affect your everyday life in that way. I mean, I think we all know that like DNA has the ability to have mutations that can make us sick or well, but I didn't realize it was such a pervasive thing, you know?
Yeah, it was really interesting when she was talking about how many of the clients she sees that have some kind of deficiency or mutation on the neurotransmitters in their brain. I think that was really interesting to me because I definitely notice it in the work that I do as a therapist.
Well, it just makes sense with our modern day diets and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I would highly recommend reaching out to Diane if you are curious about how your DNA is affecting your life and what you can do, what's in your control to stay healthier. And also check out her book, Keep My Son.
Yeah. And this podcast is all about giving you, the listener, resources to better your own life. So, you know, hopefully after listening to this, you have some ideas about some steps that you can take to kind of, you know, see some instant practical improvement. And then if you feel like you need it, please do reach out to Diane through the different resources we mentioned already.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you next week for another episode.
Bye.